This airline pilot's daughter tries to stop a millionaire from jumping out of the plane without a parachute, but he pulls her arm and does something terrible. Support my work by making a comment and subscribing to my channel. Please help me bring joy to people through these stories. The private jet sliced through the afternoon sky as Harper Klein adjusted her flight attendant uniform belt for the third time that flight. Her fingers trembled slightly as she arranged the glasses on the tray, trying to maintain her composure in front of the only passenger on board. Reginald Sterling, the powerful CEO of Horizon Development, had been restless in his leather seat for over an hour. At 25, Harper wasn't a seasoned flight attendant. In fact, the job was just a means to pay for medical school. What kept her steady was knowing her father, Earl, was in the cockpit. He'd gotten her this opportunity after 15 years of flying for the Sterling family. "More water, Mr. Sterling?" Harper asked, noticing the businessman had emptied his glass for the 5th time in less than half an hour. His eyes were glazed, pupils dilated in a way that worried her. Reginald didn't respond. His hands drummed frantically on the armrest, and beads of sweat trickled down his forehead, even with the air conditioning blasting. Harper knew those signs. During her medical studies, she'd learned about different psychiatric conditions. Something was very wrong. "Mr. Sterling?" She tried again, her voice firmer this time. The businessman turned sharply, his eyes meeting hers with a disturbing intensity. "Can't you see it?" he asked, his voice trembling with excitement. "The colors, they're dancing out there. The sky is calling me." Harper felt a chill run down her spine. In her few months working on private flights, she'd never witnessed anything like it. Reginald Sterling had always been a discreet and polite passenger, known for sleeping during most of the trips. "Sir, please, I need you to remain seated," she said, trying to stay calm as she saw him unbuckling his seatbelt. Her training hadn't prepared her for a situation like this. No, you don't understand." Reginald stood up suddenly, staggering toward the aisle. "I can fly. I always could, but they never let me try." Harper's heart leaped when he started moving towards the aircraft door. "Dad!" she shouted into the intercom, her voice betraying her panic. "I need help here." But it was too late to wait. For help. Reginald already had his hands on the door latch, his movements erratic but determined. Harper didn't hesitate. She threw herself at him, grabbing his arm with all the strength she could muster. "Let go of me!" he yelled, his eyes completely out of control. "You can't stop me from being free." In the ensuing struggle, Harper felt her body being dragged along with his. Panic set in when she realized she was losing the physical battle. Reginald was much stronger, and his current condition seemed to multiply his strength. The plane hit turbulence at the exact moment. She finally managed to pull him away from the door, sending them both crashing against the cabin wall. Harper hit her head hard, her vision blurring for a moment. When she fully regained her senses, her father was already there, helping to restrain Reginald, who was now shouting incoherently about conspiracies and people who wanted to prevent him from reaching his true potential. "Call Dr. Eleanor Vance," Earl ordered, while trying to keep the businessman immobilized. "Her number is on the emergency list." With trembling hands, Harper grabbed the satellite phone and dialed Reginald's sister's number. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, almost too cold for the situation. "I was expecting this," Eleanor said after hearing the account. "He shouldn't have been flying today. Give him the medication in the black briefcase, in the overhead compartment. That should calm him down until we land." The rest of the flight passed in tense silence. Reginald, now sedated, slept soundly in his seat, oblivious to the chaos he'd caused. Harper watched him from afar, her heart still racing, unaware that the incident would forever change the course of her life. The next morning, Earl was called to an emergency meeting with the aviation company's board. Harper waited for hours in the small apartment they shared, her stomach churning with worry. When her father finally arrived, she knew immediately that Something terrible had happened. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped in a way she'd never seen before. "They revoked my license," he said, his voice broken. "I'm being held responsible for the incident. They said it was my negligence not to check the passenger's condition before the flight." "But that's absurd," Harper protested, feeling anger rising in her chest. "There was no way you could have known, and I was there. I can testify that." "It doesn't matter, kiddo," Earl interrupted, collapsing heavily onto the worn sofa. "The decision's been made, and there's more." He ran a hand over his tired face, seeming to age 10 years in a matter of seconds. "The company is suing for damages. Our insurance, it doesn't cover this kind of situation." Harper felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. Her father had been the sole provider for the family since her mother passed away 5 years ago. His salary paid the rent, the bills, and most importantly, her medical school tuition. "I can work more," she said quickly, her brain searching for desperate solutions. "I can take more flights, work overtime." "There are no more flights, Harper," Earl said, his voice laden with defeat. "We've both been let go. They don't want to risk any more incidents." The silence that followed was deafening. Father and daughter remained seated on the small sofa, their hands intertwined, as the reality of the situation slowly settled upon them like a heavy lead curtain. "What are we going to do now, Dad?" Harper asked, her voice no more than a whisper. Earl didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on a distant point, and Harper recognized there the beginning of something that scared her even more than the prospect of losing everything. She was seeing her father, her hero, her safe harbor, begin to fall apart before her eyes. The weeks that followed were a nightmare for Harper and her father. The modest apartment where they lived, once a welcoming haven after long flights, now seemed to suffocate them with its walls full of memories. Earl spent hours sitting in the old armchair by the window, his gaze lost on the horizon, as if he were still in the heights he loved so much. Harper watched, helpless, as her father sank deeper and deeper into an abyss of depression. The strong, determined man she had always known had turned into a shadow of himself. Bills began to pile up on the kitchen table, and the overdue rent had already resulted in 3 visits from the landlord, each one more threatening than the last. "Dad, you need to eat something," Harper insisted, placing a plate of soup on the small table next to the armchair. Earl just shook his head without taking his eyes off the window. Medical school, her dream since adolescence, now seemed like an unattainable luxury. Harper had tried to negotiate with the university, explain her situation, but the rules were clear: no payment, no way to continue. With a broken heart, she put her enrollment on hold, promising herself that it would only be temporary. During her walks through the city in search of work, Harper couldn't stop thinking about Reginald Sterling and the incident that had destroyed her family's life. News about the businessman was scarce. Just a few notes in social columns mentioning his temporary departure from Horizon Development for health reasons. It was during one of these walks that she stopped in front of the imposing building of the construction company. The sun reflected on the mirrored windows, creating an almost blinding glow. Harper felt resentment growing in her chest, mixed with an idea that was beginning to take shape in her mind. "I need to do something," she murmured to herself, squeezing the worn strap of her bag. "I can't let everything end like this." The next morning, Harper was back at the building, this time wearing the only business suit she owned, a navy blue pencil skirt and a white blouse bought for her presentations in college. Her heart was beating erratically as she approached the reception desk. "Good morning, I'm here to apply for the personal assistant position," she said, her voice firmer than she felt inside. The receptionist looked up from the computer, analyzing her with disinterest. "We don't have any openings at the moment," she replied dryly, turning her attention back to the screen. "Please," Harper insisted, leaning over the counter. "I know," Mr. Sterling is in need of someone. I read about it in the newspaper. It was a lie, but she needed to try. Before the receptionist could respond, an elegant woman appeared in the lobby. Her high heels echoed on the marble floor, and something in her posture exuded authority. Harper immediately recognized the voice she had heard on the phone during the incident on the plane. It was Eleanor Vance. "You seem quite determined," Eleanor commented, approaching the counter. Her perceptive eyes studied Harper from head to toe. "Why do you want this job so badly?" Harper felt a chill but maintained her composure. She had rehearsed her story dozens of times. "I really need to work, doctor. I have experience with customer service. I'm organized, and I learn quickly. Besides..." She hesitated for a moment. "I have some knowledge of psychiatric conditions due to my medical studies." This seemed to capture Eleanor's interest. "Medicine? And why aren't you studying anymore?" "Financial problems," Harper replied, feeling her face burn. "I had to put the course on hold temporarily." Eleanor was silent for a few moments, her fingers drumming softly on the reception counter. "My brother really needs an assistant," she finally said. "Someone who can assist him both in the practical matters of everyday life and in his recovery process. Someone discreet and, above all, trustworthy." Harper nodded, feeling the weight of Eleanor's gaze on her. "I can do that," she affirmed, praying her voice wouldn't betray her nervousness. "The job will be at his house," Eleanor continued. "You'll have to live there, at least for the first few months. There's a suitable maid's room, and all your expenses will be covered, in addition to the salary." Harper's heart leaped. Living in Reginald's house, being constantly close to the man who had ruined her life? But then she thought of her father, dwindling more and more each day, the bills piling up, the dream of college drifting away. "When can I start?" she asked, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. "Tomorrow," Eleanor replied, a small smile appearing at the corner of her lips. "But there are some rules that need to be very clear." As Eleanor listed the conditions of the job, Harper couldn't help but notice something disturbing in the woman's tone. There was a calculated coldness in her words, a detachment that seemed too artificial for someone talking about her own brother. "And most importantly," Eleanor concluded, leaning slightly over the table, "is that you must not, under any circumstances, question his treatment or try to intervene in any way. That is my responsibility as a doctor and a sister. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Harper replied, feeling a chill run down her spine. That night, when telling her father about the new job, Harper omitted who she would be working for. She only said that she would be a companion for a businessman in recovery, living in his house. Earl barely reacted to the news, only nodding slightly. "It's going to be okay, Dad," she promised, hugging him tightly. "I'll send money every week and I'll be back in school soon." As she packed her small suitcase, Harper tried to convince herself that she was doing the right thing. She needed to find out what really happened on that flight. She needed to understand why her father was being held responsible for something that was clearly beyond his control. What she didn't know was that she was about to plunge into a web of secrets much darker and more dangerous than she could imagine, and that her decision to accept that job would be just the first step in a journey that would forever change not only her life, but the lives of everyone around her. The Sterling mansion was exactly as Harper imagined, an imposing building surrounded by a meticulously manicured garden. As she followed Eleanor through the main entrance, carrying her worn suitcase, she couldn't help but notice the contrast between her world and this environment of luxury and privilege. "Your room is in the back," Eleanor indicated, her voice echoing through the entrance hall. "But first, I need you to meet Hazel." It was then that Harper saw her, a teenager who was too thin almost fragile, standing at the top of the stairs. Her large eyes seemed even bigger due to the paleness of her face, and the long sleeves of her sweater, even in the heat of that morning, immediately caught Harper's attention. "Hazel, this is Harper, your father's new assistant," Eleanor introduced. The girl just nodded, without saying a word, her fingers nervously pulling at the sleeves of her sweater. "She doesn't talk much," Eleanor explained after Hazel disappeared silently into her room. "Her father's episodes affected her deeply. It's another thing you'll need to monitor." Harper felt her heart clench. In her plans of revenge and justice, she hadn't considered the existence of a clearly disturbed teenager. The weight of the situation began to become even more real. Her room, despite being in the back of the house, was larger than the entire apartment she shared with her father. A comfortable bed, a spacious closet, and even a small desk made up the space. But there was no time to admire the room. Eleanor soon called her to go over her duties. "Reginald is in the study," she explained as they went upstairs. "He spends most of his time there since the incident. Your main role will be to ensure he takes his medication on time and to maintain a calm and organized environment." The study was a large room, with bookshelves lining the walls and a large solid wood desk near the window. Reginald was sitting there, focused on some papers. When he looked up to see who was entering, Harper's heart skipped a beat. It was the first time she'd seen him since the day on the plane. But something was different. The man in front of her seemed like a faded version of the one she'd met. His eyes, once so vibrant even in his frenzy, were now opaque, almost empty. His hands, which had previously gesticulated frantically, now rested inert on the desk. "Reginald, this is Harper, your new assistant," Eleanor introduced. "She'll help you with your routine and medication." Reginald simply nodded, his gaze already returning to the papers on the desk. There was no sign of recognition in his face. The medication he'd taken during the incident had truly erased his memory of that day. The first few weeks were an exercise in patience and observation. Harper soon realized there was a strict routine in the house, orchestrated by Eleanor with military precision. Reginald's medications were administered at specific times, always under the supervision of her or Harper. Food was served at set times, and even visits were strictly controlled. But it was Hazel who caught her attention the most. The teenager rarely left her room, except for meals, which she barely touched. When she spoke, it was in whispers and always with her eyes downcast. Harper began to notice other worrying signs: the disguised cuts on the sweater sleeves, the sound of vomiting coming from the bathroom late at night, the panicked looks when her father had even a slight mood swing. One night, while making her usual rounds of the house, Harper heard voices coming from Reginald's study. She quietly approached the ajar door. "You're not improving as you should, Reginald." Eleanor's voice sounded irritated. "You need to try. Impada, the company can't wait forever." "I'm trying, Eleanor." Reginald's response was almost a murmur. "But these drugs, sometimes I feel like they're making me worse." "Don't be ridiculous. I'm your doctor. I know exactly what's best for you. Or would you rather go back to that experimental treatment that almost killed you?" Harper frowned. Something about the way Eleanor spoke to her brother bothered her deeply. It didn't seem like the concern of a sister, or even the objectivity of a doctor. There was something else, something she couldn't quite define. The days turned into weeks, and Harper began to notice disturbing patterns. Whenever Reginald showed signs of improvement, of greater lucidity, something happened to destabilize him again. And Eleanor was always nearby, ready to help with new medications, new restrictions. One morning, while organizing Reginald's medications, Harper noticed something odd. The capsules she was supposed to administer seemed different from the ones that had arrived the previous week. Not in appearance, but in weight, in texture. Her years of studying medicine, even incomplete, had taught her enough to arouse her suspicion. She decided to keep one of the old capsules and one of the new ones, carefully hiding them in her room. She needed to find a way to analyze them, to confirm her suspicions. But how to do that without arousing Eleanor's attention? The answer came unexpectedly through Hazel. One night, Harper found the teenager sitting on the bathroom floor, shaking with recent cutting marks on her arms. "Please, don't tell Aunt Eleanor," Hazel begged, her eyes filled with tears. "She'll put me back in the clinic." "Back in the clinic?" Harper asked gently, while cleaning and bandaging the cuts with the first aid kit. "The last time Dad had a bad episode," Hazel explained between sobs. "She said it was for my own good. But that place, those people..." It was then that Hazel revealed something that made Harper's blood run cold. The clinic where she had been, interned, was run by a former colleague of Eleanor, someone who, according to rumors among the patients, performed alternative treatments without proper supervision. "Sometimes," Hazel continued, her voice almost a whisper, "I hear Aunt Eleanor talking about taking Dad there too. She says it's the only place where he can be controlled properly." That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Harper couldn't stop thinking. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. The different medications, Eleanor's controlling behavior, Hazel's constant fear, Reginald's gradual deterioration. But her moment of clarity was interrupted by a sharp scream coming from upstairs. Rushing up the stairs, Harper found Reginald in his study, standing on the desk, his eyes wide with panic. "They're here!" he shouted, pointing to the shadows in the corners of the room. "They want to get me! Eleanor was right, I can't trust anyone!" While trying to calm Reginald, Harper saw out of the corner of her eye Eleanor standing in the doorway, watching the scene with an expression that, for a brief moment, seemed almost satisfied. The episode that night left deep marks on the entire house. Reginald spent the following days practically catatonic, medicated almost to unconsciousness by Eleanor's order. Hazel withdrew even further into her world, refusing even to come out for meals. And Harper, torn between her growing suspicion and her professional duty, felt the weight of every decision she needed to make. During her bi-weekly days off, when she visited her father, Harper could barely recognize the man she found. Earl was increasingly thin, with deep, dark circles under his eyes and a lost look that broke her heart. The money she sent every week kept the basic bills paid, but it wasn't enough to pull her father out of the abyss of depression he had plunged into. "Dad, you need to eat better," Harper insisted, preparing a soup that she knew would probably cool untouched. "Maybe you could try giving some theory lessons to beginners. Your knowledge of aviation is still valuable." But Earl just shook his head, his gaze fixed on the window, as if he could still see the sky he had loved so much through the walls of the small apartment. "I can't fly anymore, kiddo," he murmured, his voice laden with a sadness that seemed to have no end. "I'm nothing anymore." Returning to the Sterling mansion that night, Harper found Hazel sitting on the back steps, an unusual place for the teenager who normally hid in her room. Her arms were marked with new cuts, some still red and recent. "They fought again," Hazel whispered when Harper sat down next to her. "Dad said he doesn't want to take the drugs anymore, that they're making him too confused. But Aunt Eleanor..." Hazel's voice faltered, her hands trembling as she pulled the sleeves of her sweater down. "She said she's going to put him in the clinic if he doesn't cooperate, like she did with me." Harper felt her heart clench. "Hazel, can you tell me more about that clinic? About what happened to you there?" The teenager looked around, as if checking that they were really alone, before continuing in an even lower whisper. "It's a horrible place. They drug you until you can't think straight. And there are things they do, treatments that don't seem right." "What kind of treatments?" Harper asked gently, trying not to scare the girl. "I don't know how to explain it right," Hazel replied, hugging her knees. But there was a patient there. She told me that sometimes they gave different medications than the ones that were prescribed, that they did tests with new medications without telling anyone. That information made Harper remember the different capsules she had saved. She needed to find a way to confirm her suspicions. But how? It was then that she remembered Marina, her former college classmate who now worked in an analysis laboratory. The next morning, taking advantage of the fact that Eleanor had left for an appointment, Harper called Marina. "I need a huge favor," she explained, trying to keep her voice down even in the confinement of her room. "I need you to analyze some capsules with absolute discretion." "Harper, that's irregular," Marina hesitated. "I could lose my job." "Please, Marina, it's a matter of life and death, literally." After some more insistence, Marina agreed to help, but with one condition. Harper would have to take the capsules personally, and no one could know. The problem was getting out of the mansion without raising suspicion. Eleanor strictly controlled everyone's schedules, especially Harper's. It was Hazel who surprisingly offered a solution. "I can pretend I'm having a crisis," she whispered during one of their nightly conversations. "Aunt Eleanor always lets me stay with you when that happens." The plan was risky, but it was the only chance they had. The next afternoon, Hazel's screams echoed through the house. When Eleanor rushed to her niece's room, she found the teenager in an apparent state of panic, with Harper trying to calm her down. "She's delirious about the clinic again," Harper explained, keeping her voice professional. "I think she needs someone with her today." Eleanor hesitated for a moment, her perceptive eyes studying the scene. "All right," she finally agreed, "but keep your cell phone on and don't let her hurt herself." As soon as Eleanor left, Hazel stopped shaking and looked at Harper with surprising determination. "Go," she whispered. "I'll be fine. Just, please, help my dad." Harper rushed to the laboratory, her heart beating erratically. Marina was waiting for her at the back door, looking nervous. "This has to be quick," she said, leading Harper to her workstation. The hours that followed were of intense anxiety. While Marina performed the tests, Harper couldn't stop thinking about Hazel, alone in the mansion, and about her own father, withering away in his apartment. So many lives destroyed, so many dreams interrupted. When the results finally began to appear on the computer screen, Marina let out an exclamation of surprise. "Harper, this is serious. The old capsules contain the correct medication, but the new ones are practically a placebo. There's only a minimal fraction of the active substance." "So that's it," Harper murmured, feeling a mixture of horror and validation. She's sabotaging his treatment deliberately. But her moment of discovery was interrupted by the shrill ring of her cell phone. It was Hazel, her voice trembling with real panic this time. "Harper, come back quickly," the teenager whispered. "Aunt Eleanor found out you left. She's furious. And she's talking about taking Dad to the clinic today." Harper's blood ran cold. She needed to go back immediately. But now she had concrete proof of Eleanor's manipulation, what to do with this information, how to use it to save Reginald and Hazel without putting everyone in even more danger. Rushing back to the mansion, Harper didn't notice the dark car that was following her discreetly. Inside it, Eleanor watched with a cold smile, her phone already dialing a familiar number. "Dr. Nichols?" "Yes. I think we'll need 2 slots at the clinic." Her voice was calm, almost satisfied. "No, it's not just for my brother. We have a problematic employee who needs to be treated." Harper's heart was pounding as she climbed the back stairs of the mansion. Something was wrong. The house was too quiet, plunged into a stillness that seemed to foreshadow disaster. Reaching the main hallway, she found Hazel huddled in a corner, shaking. "She knows everything," the teenager whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "She found the capsules you kept in your room. She's with Dad in the study now." Before Harper could respond, Eleanor's voice cut through the air like a blade. "How nice of you to join us, Harper. Why don't you come in? We have a lot to talk about." In the study, Reginald was sitting in his usual armchair, but there was something different in his posture. His eyes, normally clouded by medication, had a brightness of lucidity that Harper hadn't seen in weeks. Eleanor was standing behind him, her hands resting on her brother's shoulders in a gesture that seemed more like a threat than comfort. "You... No, I always thought there was something familiar about you," Eleanor began, her voice dangerously soft. "It took me a while to realize where I had seen your face before. It was that day, on the plane. You were the flight attendant, weren't you? The daughter of the incompetent pilot who almost killed my brother." Harper felt the blood run cold in her veins. Reginald looked up, confusion and recognition beginning to mix in his gaze. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice firmer than Harper had heard in weeks. "It turns out, dear brother, that your dedicated assistant has been deceiving us all along," Eleanor replied, squeezing Reginald's shoulders. "She infiltrated our house, gained our trust, all as part of some sordid revenge plan." "It's not true," Harper protested, stepping forward. "Yes, I was on the plane that day. Yes, I'm Earl's daughter, but I came here because I needed to understand what happened, and what I discovered is much worse than I imagined." With trembling hands, Harper pulled out of her pocket the laboratory report that Marina had given her. "Your sister has been sabotaging your treatment, Mr. Sterling. The drugs she's been giving you are placebos. She's keeping you sick on purpose." Reginald took the paper, his eyes quickly scanning the chemical analyses. His expression changed. With each line he read, understanding and horror mixing on his face. "Eleanor, is this true?" he asked, his voice choked. "Don't be ridiculous, Reginald," Eleanor replied, but there was a note of tension in her voice that hadn't been there before. "This girl is manipulating you, can't you see? She forged these documents to separate us, to destroy our family as revenge for what happened to her father." "No!" A new voice sounded from the study door. Hazel was there, pale but determined. "Aunt Eleanor is lying, Dad. I saw her switching your medications several times, and that's not all." The teenager stepped further into the study, pulling a small recording device from her sweater pocket. "I started recording her conversations. After I got back from the clinic, I knew something was wrong, but I was too afraid to speak up." Eleanor moved with surprising speed, trying to grab the recorder, but Hazel was quicker. She pressed the play button, and Eleanor's voice filled the room. "Of course the drugs aren't working, you idiot. They weren't supposed to work. The longer Reginald stays unstable, the longer I have to take complete control of the company. And if anyone starts asking too many questions, well, we can always resort to an emergency admission, can't we?" The silence that followed was deafening. Reginald stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on his sister. "All these years, you've been keeping me sick on purpose. You've been drugging me, manipulating me. It was for your own good," Eleanor burst out, her mask of calm finally cracking. "You were never strong enough to handle the company alone. Your episodes, your instability. I had to take control. It was the only way." "And the clinic?" Hazel asked, her voice trembling. "The experiments they do there? The people they hurt?" "Medical necessities," Eleanor replied coldly. "Sometimes we have to make difficult decisions for the greater good. You're too young to understand." "I understand perfectly," Reginald interjected, his voice laden with suppressed anger. "I understand that you destroyed my life, poisoned my mind, and traumatized my daughter. And now you're going to answer for it all." He moved towards the phone, but Eleanor was quicker. In a fluid motion, she pulled a syringe from her blazer pocket. "No one is going to do anything," she declared, her voice trembling slightly. "All of you are going to sit down and be quiet while I call the clinic. It's time for a family admission. "No!" Harper shouted, lunging towards Eleanor without thinking. In the ensuing confusion, the syringe fell and rolled under a bookshelf. Eleanor launched herself at Harper, her manicured nails leaving deep marks on the young woman's face. It was Hazel who changed everything. While the two women fought, the teenager ran out of the study. Seconds later, the sound of sirens began to echo across the property. "I called the police," Hazel announced, returning to the doorway. "I called as soon as I saw Aunt Eleanor following Harper earlier. I knew something bad was going to happen." Eleanor froze, her face a mask of disbelief. "You wouldn't do this to me. I'm your aunt, your family." "Family doesn't hurt family," Hazel replied, tears streaming down her face. "Family doesn't torture the people they claim to love." The following minutes were a blur of activity. Police. Officers stormed the study. Eleanor was restrained and led away, shouting threats and accusations. But to Harper, it all seemed distant, as if she were watching a scene from a movie. She only returned to reality when she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Reginald, his eyes now completely lucid, though filled with a deep sadness. "Forgive me," he said softly, "for what happened on the plane, for what happened to your father. I wasn't myself." "It wasn't your fault," Harper replied, feeling the weight of months of resentment begin to dissipate. "You were a victim too." Hazel approached, still trembling, and Reginald wrapped her in a tight hug. "We're going to fix everything," he promised, kissing the top of his daughter's head. "We're going to heal together." But while the police conducted the preliminary investigations, Harper couldn't help but think of her father, alone in the small apartment. How would he react to all this truth? And more importantly, would it be possible to recover everything they had lost? The answer to those questions would have to wait. At that moment, standing in the middle of the chaos that had settled in the mansion, Harper was only sure of one thing: nothing would be the same. 6 months had passed since the night the truth came to light. Autumn painted the trees in the mansion garden in shades of red and gold, and a gentle breeze carried the last leaves of the year. Harper watched the landscape through the window of the library, where Reginald now conducted his therapy sessions. The investigation into Eleanor's actions had revealed a web of manipulation far more extensive than they had imagined. The clinic was shut down, and several professionals involved in the irregular treatments were indicted. But for Harper, the greatest victory wasn't in the lawsuits, but in the small changes she saw every day. Reginald, free from the harmful influence of the fake medications, responded well to the new treatment. His manic episodes had decreased significantly, and for the first time in years, he was able to maintain a stable routine. The businessman had decided to temporarily step away from the construction company to focus on his recovery and, above all, on rebuilding his relationship with Hazel. The teenager also showed signs of improvement. The cuts on her arms were healing, not only physically but emotionally. With the help of a therapist specializing in trauma, Hazel began to open up again, to smile more often. Her meals, once a battlefield, were now moments of genuine family connection. "Dad, you won't believe it." Hazel ran into the library, her eyes shining with excitement. "I got an A on the literature paper. The teacher said my analysis on resilience was the best in the class." Reginald hugged his daughter proudly, and Harper couldn't help but notice how the gesture now seemed natural, without the fear and hesitation that had previously marked their interactions. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Shall we celebrate it at dinner?" "Yes," Hazel replied, then turned to Harper. "You're coming too, right? And bringing Mr. Klein?" The mention of her father made Harper's heart warm. Earl was also different. Reginald's decision not only to clear his name in aviation, but also to hire him as an instructor at the company's pilot school, had given the man back a purpose. Of course we're coming, Harper smiled. He wouldn't miss the chance to tell you another one of his flight stories. Later that day, while helping Hazel with her math homework, Harper received news that would once again change the course of her life. The official envelope from medical school brought not only her readmission to the course, but also a full scholarship. It was Dad's idea, Hazel revealed, barely containing her excitement. He created a scholarship program at the construction company for medical students interested in mental health. You're the first recipient. The news caught Harper by surprise. Tears began to form in her eyes as she read and reread the letter. Her dream, which seemed to have been shattered that fateful night on the plane, now reborn in a way she could never have imagined. The celebratory dinner brought everyone together. On the mansion's veranda, Earl, now with color in his cheeks and a renewed gleam in his eye, entertained Hazel with stories of his early flights. Reginald, watching the scene with a serene smile, seemed finally at peace. "You know, Harper," he said softly, while the others laughed at another one of Earl's stories. "Sometimes I think that day on the plane, as terrible as it was also a miracle in disguise." Harper looked at him, surprised. "How so?" "If none of that had happened, Eleanor would continue to manipulate me. Hazel would continue to suffer in silence. I would never have discovered the truth about my treatment. And you—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You would never have entered our lives to help us heal." Reginald's words touched Harper's heart deeply. She thought about how she had arrived at that house driven by resentment and a desire for justice, but ended up finding much more than she expected. She found a new family, a new purpose, and a chance to make a difference in people's lives. "Tomorrow I'm giving my first class as an instructor," Earl commented, joining the conversation. "And guess who's going to be my first student?" Everyone looked at Reginald, who smiled nervously. "I thought it was time to face my fears, and what better way to do that than by learning to fly?" "But isn't it dangerous?" Hazel asked, the concern evident in her voice. "Not with your grandpa Earl as the instructor," Reginald replied, winking at his daughter. The word grandpa made Earl's eyes shine with emotion. The next morning, Harper accompanied her father and Reginald to the small airport where the lessons would take place. The day was perfect for flying, with a blue sky and few clouds. As she watched the two men doing the pre-flight inspection, talking animatedly about instruments and procedures, she felt a deep gratitude. "Is everything okay?" Hazel asked, taking her hand. The teenager had insisted on coming along, determined to overcome her own fears. "It's better than okay," Harper replied, squeezing the hand of the girl who had become like a sister to her. "It's perfect." The small plane took off smoothly, taking Reginald and Earl for their first lesson. From where they were, Harper and Hazel could see the aircraft making a gentle curve against the morning sky, like a metaphor for the new direction their lives had taken. "You know what I like most about flying?" Hazel commented, her eyes following the plane. "It's that up there, everything seems possible. All the problems seem smaller." Harper smiled, wrapping her arms around the teenager's shoulders. She was right. Sometimes we need to rise above our circumstances to find clarity and healing. And there, at that airport, watching two families who had been torn apart transform into one, stronger and more united, Harper finally understood that there is no wound that time, love, and understanding cannot heal. The plane made another graceful turn in the sky, and Harper could imagine the smile on her father's face, the concentration in Reginald's eyes, both finding in the heights the peace that had for so long escaped them on solid ground. At that moment, under the morning sun, all the pieces finally fell into place. Fear gave way to hope, resentment to understanding, and the painful past to a future full of possibilities. Because sometimes it is necessary to lose the ground under our feet to discover that we can, yes, learn to fly.